Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Point number 7, category 2 love we are discussing. And that is that this is number 6. Number 6, okay? I used to watch the quote older pastors often they put things in their shirt pocket and they could never find them as I was going up in the ministry, touching every base. And I would say, boy, they've got a lot on their mind, or, something setting in or what have you, because there it is right there, and they forgot it right in their shirt pocket. And this morning I wrote my check for the church and my check for dimensions, and I put them in my shirt pocket. And I've looked high and low all over this church, and I found them as I was sitting there just a moment ago, right in my shirt pocket where I left them. So what does that tell me? I am where those guys were way back when. Okay. We're talking about category 2 love, designed by God in eternity past, and implemented in time toward hopefully one of the right genetic number. That's why we can call an RM or RW your opposite number, because God has that in mind, and it's taken right from the book of Genesis. Now, point number 7, God designed this relationship as the fourth institute of divine establishment. Now, what does divine establishment do? Well, like our military, marriage is the stabilizer of a society. If you have a weak, unstable military, you have a weak, unstable nation. If you have weak, unstable marriages, you have a weak, unstable nation. So the military and marriage are two of the foremost establishment factors. Now, one of the prime, of course, is the local church, but we're not on that. If you have local churches that are weak and a small pivot that is a group of people that are in fellowship with God, then that also weakens the nation. But two are of the foremost pillars around which any society is built, that strengthens it, that preserves it, that prospers it, that protects it, gives it long life, is that of the marriage relationship. Now, because God made it, He had to do something. He had to include it as part of His divine decrees. Now, you'll remember, we've talked about the books, other than the Bible, that God has that determine some of His decisions, the book of bodily appointments, and then His sovereign decision to bring that person in that book to life in time. Well, He had to provide, therefore, for our universe, our planet, the sun, the rain. He had to provide clothing, He had to provide air. He has to provide food and water and so forth. Therefore, one of the things that He has provided in time for the blessing of man is category 2 love. Now, this is a very, very important love, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But in chapter 3 of the book of Ecclesiastes, it starts off with verse 1, "To everything there is a season, a time to every purpose under heaven, time to be born, time to die, and so forth." And you come on down to verse number 8. Now, of course, verse 8 implies all the categories of love. But that would mean then that category 2 love is there. A time to love. God has incorporated loving as part of the human race. Now, some people are born and never get to love God. Some people are born and do have loving parents. Sometimes they don't. There are very few relationships in this life that actually bring true, genuine love. But God has incorporated that for the blessing of mankind. For the unbeliever, Ecclesiastes 9:9, it's the best this life has to offer. He leaves father and mother, according to the principle, and cleaves to his wife, adheres to his wife, stays with his wife. Now, that principle belongs to the unbeliever, and you know what? The wife, therefore, is perhaps one of the only real people who will love him, and vice versa. Therefore, this is a very, very, well, it is. Maybe he didn't have a face that his mother could love. Maybe when he was born, the doctor smacked the mom. I don't know. But with regard to that, for the unbeliever, if he finds a spouse, he or she finds a spouse that truly loves him, if he's never saved, God will never directly love him. It's all impersonal with God. He's an unbeliever. He's angry with the wicked every day. He hates those who are workers of iniquity. The love that is in John 3:16 is impersonal love, whosoever will. It only becomes personal upon salvation and the imputation of God's own righteousness. Then he can love us personally. But this guy might never have another best friend, true friend, another person who really loves him. But if he finds his right spouse, that's the best life can offer, because he will only have somebody to love him in time. That is the only love he will ever know. He will die and go to hell where nobody loves anybody. Chapter 9, verse 9. That's why the preacher in Ecclesiastes says, "Live joyfully with the wife of thy youth, whom thou lovest all the days of thy life of vanity." That's why we know this is an unbeliever. It's an empty life. What is the only thing that gives meaning to this person's life? His wife. A faithful, loyal, loving companion. That's the only love that perhaps he will ever know. That's why Category 2 love is a very, very important thing. And that's why the devil is attacking it so vehemently in the time in which we live. Note, which God has given thee under the sun all the days of thy vanity, for that is the portion of this life, in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun. That is your reason for living, and that is to keep body and soul together, the wolf from the door, so that you can spend time with the only person perhaps in the universe that will ever love you, and that situation will change when you go to hell. You might never see one another again. So this is a tremendous love. It is nothing to be sneezed at. It's not to be taken lightly. And yet it is today in our society. People are confused about it. Now that brings us to point 8 and the Song of Solomon. If they translated the Song of Solomon literally, they'd probably have to put it in one of the X-rated bookstores. It is a sizzling book. That's why the dons of the King James couched it in very prudish language, so that you really can't tell what's being said unless you know the original language. But we're not going to get into the sizzling part. We're going to have to mature a little bit before we bring that out. Song of Solomon, chapter 2. We ask, please, that we pay attention, okay? We're serious about our Bible study here, and we want those who are serious to stay. Distractions are not allowed, okay? You might do that at home or in the classroom. We don't do it here. It might affect somebody's eternity, and I get awfully angry at somebody who would affect the quality of somebody's eternal life. All right, now, Song of Solomon, chapter 2. He brought me to his banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Okay, now, point number 8 in Category 2 love is simply this. Once you find RM and RW, this is particularly pertaining to the man. Well, you say, Pastor, we sing this song and we talk about God. That's true. But actually, this is where the right man finds the right woman, and he puts his banner over her. The banner, word in the Hebrew, degel, is a military flag. Now, what does that mean? Turn to Psalm 60. Psalm 60. Verse number 4. Here is the verse that tells us God puts a banner over us. Thou hast given a banner to them that fear thee. This is 64 in Psalms. That it might be displayed because of the truth, that thy beloved Now, here is the situation where our marriage relationship is analogous to our relationship with the Lord. That thy beloved might be delivered, save with thy right hand, hear me. Now, what is the point that we're making here? Simply this. Everyone else should be considered inconsequential to your right person. That's it. There should be a banner over them, and you should be willing to fight for them and or die for them if necessary in protecting them and preserving them. It is a stabilizing factor of society. But today, we have a few people willing to stand up and die for their nation, let alone for their spouse. In fact, you talk about the Battle Hymn of the Republic. In most homes today, they probably awakened with the sound of the trumpet, charge, and it was that way. But Category 2 love actually is a preservative of a nation, simply because they put up a banner and said, just like God protects his beloved, just like God is willing to go all out as he did at the cross in order to save and deliver and provide for and protect, there is to be a banner over the loved one, the RMRW, in this case especially the man, and that is saying, I'm willing to do what it takes to preserve, protect, and provide for your life. Okay, now let's wade out into the hotter waters of this study. Titus, chapter 2. There is a place, I speak tongue-in-cheek, for women preachers. Pastor, you have changed. Have you switched positions? Are you afraid of what that other ministerial association with all women's going to do to you if you don't change? No. Because I'm not talking about behind the pulpit, necessarily. As the pastor teacher has poimen didaskalos, and he is the head of the local church. Kola didaskalos is a word given to women as teachers. Okay? Note verse number 4. It's talking about the older. Now, that aged, verse number 3, where it says aged women. You always get the picture of someone decrepit on a cane and so forth when you think of someone aged. Now, that can be true. But it's talking about somebody that is more mature spiritually. It can be in the 30s, 40s, what have you. Somebody that's older. Verse 3, likewise that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, given to much wine, teachers of good things. Now, what are they going to teach? How are they going to complement the pastor teacher? Well, they're going to teach younger women how to love their husbands. Now, it is my opinion that this has not been going on simply because many times the older women don't know how to love their husbands. This aspect of love has been completely eliminated from Bible teaching today, from wedding ceremonies today, from parental teaching of young people today. Note what it says. That they might teach younger women to be sober. That just means to be serious about this matter. To love their husbands, to love their children. Now, the word love their children is a takeoff with Paul in Romans chapter 1, where he said in the last days, there'll be those who don't have natural affection. Can you imagine? Those who are getting abortions do not have much natural affection for their children. Obviously, something is wrong there. There's a screw loose or a wire cross someplace in their soul. They've got a kink in their soul. So they've got to be taught, in some cases, how to really love their kids. But we're talking about category 2 love. In an unusual word in the Greek, they need to be taught how to love their husbands. Now, the word here, remember, we talk about eros love, we talk about agape love, and we talk about phileo love. It is a derivative of phileo, and phileo is actually the highest form of love because it talks about compatibility. Now, when does God love us personally? only when we think like him. Only when we have compatible thoughts in our mind. Only when in our soul we have believed on Jesus Christ, he has imputed his righteousness. What is righteousness? Thinking. Correct thinking. We think like God on a subject about his Son. Therefore, he saves us on that basis and gives us that thought in our human spirit. Anytime we want to love God, we therefore have to have thinking compatible with him. False doctrine, unbelief, those are all things that describe people who don't think like God. That's why spirituality is thinking like him. Now, Christianity doesn't understand that per se, but we understand it. Well, what does that mean then? If we're going to live with God for all eternity, we've got to think alike. Do you know that most arguments are caused in a home because of why? Unlike thinking. She has her way, he has his way, kids have their way, and boy, it's at one another's eyeballs, and you're scratching and so forth. But that word love there means that there is a compatibility of soul. Now, if you don't like what she likes, she doesn't like what you like, and there is not much common ground, that woman will never philandros her husband. Now, mind you, with regard to the body, it doesn't take much work to have coalescence of the body. It just doesn't take much work. You young people today, and for those who say, oh, it's not true. I want to tell you, I used to play bass guitar for the group The Chantels. I started when I was a junior in high school. I know exactly what goes on there. I even went down to the St. John's South, Brownsville United Methodist Church, because the girls there, they would all go to the youth group, and let me tell you, they were the best kissers afterwards. I mean, there was nothing much else. But we used to hold our dances in there, and all the kids, they wouldn't come for any Bible study. Bible? Why? What do you mean, God? We're here for the fellowship. And that's exactly what they were there for. It doesn't take, I mean, you can even get the quote, as it were, turned on in church. It doesn't take much to be aroused biologically and to have coalescence of the body. But the problem is today is that we're not being taught from pulpits that in order to have a marriage that's pleasing to God, there must be compatibility of soul, like thinking in the mind. And if there are too many differences, even though they are legally married and morally married, there will never be spiritual compatibility. There will always be those areas in which you vehemently disagree. And one of the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, and what? Peace. Peace. In the home, peace. Nowadays, come on. Yes. Filled with the Spirit, there's your spouse. What do you have with them? Peace. Instead of all of these disagreements. But how do you have it? It means that you cycle Bible doctrine, husbands, and you think like God on a subject here. It means that you have some work to do. It means, wives, in order to have philandros love for your husband, you've got to learn the same doctrine. Oops, here I am. Yeah, I'm cycling at the right place. Okay. You've got to have very similar thoughts. Now, I know that there are always going to be differences with men and women with regard to thinking on some matters. I understand that. But do you understand that if Jesus Christ got married, he would have had to have married somebody with the same compatibility of soul as him? And do you know something? They could never have a spat. As a young person, do you know he never disobeyed his parents? As a young person, do you know he never disrupted in church? He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. He couldn't disobey one time. If he had disobeyed one time and sinned, he could have never gone to the cross for you. He sat there and he listened and he assimilated doctrine so that when he had a task to do for God, he knew exactly God's mind on the matter, and he did always those things that please him. Lo, in the volume of the book it is written of me, he said in Hebrew, I've come to do thy will, O God. How do you know God's will? He Wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed according to thy word. Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against God. When he was tempted, what did he do? He gave back a verse of Scripture. And the Bible says that when he was born to age 12, that he learned wisdom. Again, the word doctrine. From age 12 to age 30 for his public ministry, what did he do? He learned doctrine. So that he lived a perfect life to the cross. He did not sin. If he got married, he did not. And the reason that he didn't was not because, well, there is a reason too. God could have made somebody like him, but he had to show that he was willing to put off all worldly pleasures in order to accomplish. That's why he didn't have riches. That's why he didn't drive a sports car in the midst of all those chariots, horses, and mules, and camels. He had to put off everything by way of a worldly pleasure so he could focus on one thing. But now, what do you suppose your responsibility is? Each for the other and both for the Lord? How do you get both for the Lord unless you both have the mind of Christ? Philandros love means there is a responsibility both for the man and for the woman. He must assume the mind of Christ. She must assume the mind of Christ. It means coming to church, maybe taking a few notes, learning what the pastor teacher teaches, understanding God's mind on how we're to live. We always apply those things to somebody other than our spouse. But the first person we should apply doctrine to is our spouse. And ladies, there is much more given to you by way of addressing, because you are a responder, because Eve was deceived, and because she didn't have compatibility of soul with Adam. And there are people in hell today because Eve did not have philandros love. Adam was not deceived, and he knew he wasn't to eat of the tree. She was deceived and had a different mind than Adam. She convinced him to have her mind, and that's where the trouble began, with God and with one another. So, this is the love that young people need to have. It is a compatibility of soul. Anybody can argue, kiss, and make up, argue, kiss, and make up, argue, kiss, and make up. Well, as I told you, I had a whole kind of relatives that do that. Anybody can argue and then have a romantic evening that weekend, and then by Monday morning they're back at one another's throats again. But only Spirit-filled, doctrinally saturated people can have the same mind so that they can consistently live for the Lord and one another during the long haul. That's philandros love. And we need older women who understand this so they can teach it to the younger women coming up. Because all younger women know today, for the most part, is emotional response. Ooh, he's so good looking. Yeah, but what's in his soul? And it's the same thing with the ladies. Okay. Now we're going to look at, I'm not through preaching yet. I'll preach just a little bit more till we get through here. And sometimes we know exactly what I'm talking about. Nobody has developed these that I know of. I mean, I've got a library full of books, and I've not found anybody to touch on these things. And yet this is the essence of Category 2 love. It's the essence of marriage. All of these marriage books and marriage things, they don't touch on these things. I don't know whether they are afraid to touch on them or what. But there are some things that destroy Category 2 love. And I think what I'm going to do is go down the list of all of these things and just comment on them. And then, starting tonight, we will actually get into what the Bible teaches about them. So I'll allow you, and for those who take the notes, to copy as I comment. As you know, life is lived in categories. Life is understood in categories. Therefore, when it comes to sins, you have to understand that there are different types of categories. There are some things that are called sin, some plural sins. some transgressions, some iniquities, some wickedness. Those are all different words, different concepts, different categories, as it were, of the one overall category of doing something contrary to God, violating His standards or His righteousness. All right? So, with regard to category 2 love, there are 5 categories of sex sins that attack the sanctity of RMRW, or husband and wife, whatever the case might be, and try to destroy marriage. Okay? Sins against oneself. Autoerotism. What is that? That is deriving sexual gratification within and by oneself. It's what Jocelyn Elders got fired for. She wanted all of our young people to be instructed. And if I were a comedian, I could have a field day with that, but I will keep the dignity of the clergy. Autoerotism. That is, by imagining evil imaginations. One of the evil imaginations is sex in the mind with somebody other than your RW. Therefore, then, taking it upon yourself to fulfill or gratify oneself. This is the M word, or we'll give it a spicier title, autoerotism. Okay, secondly, sins against oneself, fornication. It's the voluntary sexual intercourse between 2 unmarried persons. Now, this would take in just about any sex sin, as long as the people are not legally married, have not signed the document. All right, but now that's not all. There's a second category. Sins against establishment. Remember, marriage is category 4 in the Institutes of Divine Establishment. Well, there are some specific sins with regard to that. All of it is against category 2 love. But the next sin is promiscuity. The orgies. Indiscriminate, heterogeneous. That means different types of sexual experiences, relationships with many partners. You see, where it's let them alone, let them experiment, let them have a good time, feels good, do it. Just don't have any restraints on them at all, or chaperones or any safeguards against this type of deal. Well, it might end up in promiscuity. And then by the time he or she arrives at their right marriage, their soul is so mixed up and messed up, they will never be faithful to the one God gives, or the one they have. Next, sins against establishment. Adultery. That's voluntary sexual intercourse between a married person and someone other than their lawfully wedded spouse. Now, their partner, therefore, can be married or unmarried. If they are married, 2 of them have committed adultery in that sense. But the overall sin is called adultery, and it is against establishment. Simply because there's a possibility of children and the support of children, and of course you know that's why our welfare system is in the shape that it's in, because men are promiscuous, they commit adultery, get many pregnant, and do not take the responsibility for their children. And therefore, they're deadbeat dads and a society that's got to feed mouths because they don't want to mess with the situation. Okay, there's a third category. I'm trying to go slow enough here. We will go slower later on. But the third category of sexual sins that is a violation of category 2 love is sins against nature. First of all, it's against yourself. Then it's against the establishment principle of marriage. Then it's against nature. Homosexuality. God did not create man and man or woman and woman. lesbianism, and such like of that ilk, genre, what have you, is absolutely forbidden by God, and it's seen immediately in creation, which simply means that when God created, the opposite number was the opposite sex. And homosexuality is an absolute attempt to destroy Category 2 love. Bestiality. Sexual intercourse between a human being and an animal. Now, that was done in ancient times. It is still done today, and there are prohibitions against it in the Bible. And believe you me, I have seen some people, and especially sometimes some ladies, who would treat their dogs a lot better than their husband. Perhaps that's how this particular sin happened. Or we have the shepherds out in the field. That's where we get some venereal disease, and also AIDS, the rhesus monkey in North Africa. That's where they got AIDS, because they sinned against nature. And now we have to foot the bill to the tune of billions of dollars to try to cure it and clean up the mess. Well, hey, you don't. Even nature teaches you don't have sex with animals. So therefore, that's a sin. Necrophilia, the erotic attraction and or sexual intercourse with a corpse. And the Bible talks about touching the dead to begin with, making you defiled. But that is a category of sin that has been committed and is an attack against Category 2 love. Now, here's where television and the movies always get involved. They really make light of these folks, but one day I saw where a talk show, I forget which one it was going to have one of the queens of the sadomasochistic group in America, in the world, to talk there. And she was propositioning the talk show host right there. Well, you don't know, don't knock it unless you've tried it. And he said, no, I'm not going to do this. I think it's a little abnormal. She said, no, this is great. You've got to try it. You can't talk against it unless you've experienced it. Well, let me tell you, we're going to talk against it, and we do not like masochism. What is masochism? Deriving sexual gratification by inflicting physical and or mental pain upon yourself. It's for some reason, some sort of purge. You're doing what's wrong, you know you're sinning, but if you hurt while you're doing it, well, that makes it okay, evidently, in their minds. That's called masochism. You have heightened pain, sensory pain in your physical body while you're having sex in order to get heightened sexual gratification. And that is absolutely outlawed by the Bible. It's where you have the chains and the handcuffs and the whips and the people dressed in black leather and the like. Maybe I'm talking to a very naive crowd here. And perhaps you've just been raised in a Sunday school atmosphere all of your life. Well, sadism, deriving sexual gratification by inflicting physical and or mental pain upon another. Now, I'll tell you, if there was going to be any of this would be the one to go for. I mean, for crying out loud, to hurt yourself, that's nonsense. Yeah. The other one wants it, well, that's a different story. Now, I'm speaking facetiously, of course. Both are weird, abnormal, unnatural. It's a sin against nature. It's wrong. Okay, now we come then. I didn't put one up there, and that is sadomasochism. It's a combination. And I'm sorry, I overlooked that in putting these on here. Sadomasochism is the mutual infliction of pain upon each other during sex acts in order to heighten sexual gratification. That's what's called sadomasochism. Now, believe it or not, you say, Pastor, where is that in today's society? Look at your heavy metal groups. What outfits do they wear? Chains? Black leather? hard, piercing. That's why there are certain categories of rock music that are absolutely godless. And the intensity of the decibel is meant, number one, to hurt while you're having a good time. It hurts, as John Mellencamp says, so good. What is that? Sadomasochism. And our young people are buying the records. You know what? Our parents are footing the bill. Sadomasochism. KISS, groups like that, Metallica, all of those groups are sadomasochistic, where you have to hurt to have a good time. And it's nonsense. It's wrong. Well, I've really preached today, and that's okay. We're going to go sins against society. We're almost done here. Sins against society. And that is category 10 of divine establishment. I know this to be a true story. There's a certain county in northern West Virginia where there's a whole lot of incest, a whole lot of kids looking different than the norm. Not their fault, it's just the fault of some very selfish, ignorant adults. But a young man married a girl, and she was a virgin. Now, I'm telling you the truth. As far as I know it, it's a true story. And they went on their honeymoon, and the young man from this county discovered that the girl was a virgin. And he immediately said, I want an annulment, I want a divorce. And the father said, well, what's the matter, son? He said, she was a virgin. He said, okay, divorce her. If she's not good enough for her own kind, she's not good enough for us. Incest with a close blood relative. It's a sin against society. Now, we have to watch this particular one here because, do you know something? Actually, there was a time when incest was not wrong. Obviously, Cain and Abel married their sisters and nieces and so forth. Jacob married the cousins, and Isaac went back to the land of his forefathers and so forth. In Israel, they weren't to marry outside of the tribe and outside of the nation. So we have to be very careful about this one. But you understand what I'm talking about. Next, rape. Stay with me. Probably you're all going to want to go home and take a good bath after this one. This is, I had trouble studying, but we've got to cover this because it's against category 2, and somewhere along the line, somebody's got to teach it. Rape, forced sexual intercourse with any unwilling person. Now, all of these things are repulsive. You ever heard the word on the news? They were a pedophile. Pedophilia means sexual intercourse with children. Pederasty means sexual intercourse between two males, one of which is underage or a minor. You get the terms sodomy and sodomites. Well, that's what happens here with homosexuality, and especially the sin of sodomy is when one older man takes a younger one and forces or deceives them into having sex. That is sodomy. All right, we're going to move on here, try to get as much in as we can before we dismiss. Pandering. What is pandering? Simply this, a go-between. Do you know that there have been whole movies that have been based around this idea of pandering? The movie, if you've ever seen it, Night Shift, with of all people the Fonz, was based around pandering. Prostitution. Let's go to prostitution first. Engaging in sexual intercourse for money or other gain. There have probably been many ladies who have laid down their virtue for an office promotion. Many people who have yielded themselves in this way. Well, that's none other than prostitution. You might not have gotten money for it, but you got some sort of gain, and that means you prostituted yourself. Now, in other instances, you have to have what's called either a John or a pimp. And a pimp is nothing more than a panderer. He acts as a go-between in doing two things. Either one, soliciting clients for prostitutes, making sure that the person is clean, or in procuring partners for illicit sexual intercourse. Have you ever heard anybody say, if you do this for me, I'll fix you up? I'll set you up with her. That's pandering. Okay, got 5 minutes. We started a little late. Let's go on to the last three and the last category. Voyeurism. Now, everybody knows this because there is another name given to it, the peeping Tom syndrome. It is deriving gratification sexually by viewing the nakedness of another, or by the performance of sex acts. Now, I want you to note that under this category, though biblically it's all wrong, but nationally, globally, we have an illegal and a legal aspect to voyeurism. Any of the X-rated business is legal voyeurism. That's exactly what they're doing. Now, the illegal is when you sneak up to a person's house and look peer in the window. That's the peeping Tom syndrome. But it all comes under voyeurism and is a violation of privacy. Violation, absolutely. It's a sin against category 2 love. It is, as it were, none of your business. And keep your little eyes to yourself. All right. Now, connected with voyeurism, and here is a situation where we're going to get into a little bit of fashion. Why? Well, again, let's look at what our young people are looking at. On many of the videos today, all they see, much of it is voyeurism, just about that short of the actual sex act, but they don't have much clothes on. But all of the rocking and the rolling going on is nothing more than a simulation of the sex act. It's voyeurism on screen. MTV, the voyeuristic station. It's exactly what it is. Michael and Janet Jackson are the worst. Have you ever noticed them grabbing themselves? What is that? That's voyeurism. That's autoerotism. That is arousing themselves. But emotional exhibitionism is the more or less exposing of yourself to another in an attempt to arouse them sexually and allure them into a sexual relationship. Have you ever seen the clothes that they wear? The absolute minis? The blue jeans with the gluteal muscle covering cut out of them? Same difference. What are they doing? Young people are exhibiting what the miniskirt was designed for to begin with. The woman who designed that, woman in England, said, "We want to advertise to men that we are available for easy sex in the afternoon." Obviously, if you've got a miniskirt on and the right place, you can do it. But what were they doing? Advertising. Exhibitionism. That's why. Not only is it wrong to look in that sense, to lust, but it's also a responsibility of the women, especially because of the lust of the eyes of the men, to make sure that their clothes are discreet, modest, and so forth. Okay, last thing, and we're done. And that is a sin against God's image. This is known as the phallic cult or phallicism. What is the phallic cult? It is a religious system, often practiced in groves of trees. By the way, this is going to hurt. But your Christmas tree and its ornamentations were brought to us from the phallic cult. The only difference now is that there are other images in that tree aside from the human sex organs of the phallic cult. Same difference, which involved fornication and adultery. They had their priests and priestesses that would be there available so that you could worship God, and that was their worship of God. They never had a lack for members. Let me tell you, that was except whenever a righteous man would come in and destroy the groves, but which involved fornication and adultery and the worshiping of idols formed like human sex organs.